Hello chess fans, today we're going to examine a lead in development, how to achieve it, how to maintain it, and how to have it win games for us. Joining us with the white pieces is Veselin Topalov, with the black is Vassily Ivanchuk. Veselin starts off in the Zuckertort, knight f3. Vassily answers c5, comes c4, knight to c6, d4, and c takes on d4. So this is actually the first three moves of a Queen's Indian variation, but there's a big difference. There's no pawn tension, and the pawns will never be closed up on, say, e3, e4, d4, d5. So this is a wide open position, the English symmetrical. Continuing, knight takes on d4, e6 comes g3, bishop b4 check, knight c3, queen a5, and now knight to b5. So here, fundamentally, Topalov has invested 1, 2, 3 tempi in that knight. This, of course, tests the d6 square, where the black king ends up with no castle, and Ivanchuk's development initiative are completely deflated. But Ivanchuk has an interesting defense here, d5. d5 stops the communication of the queen with the d6 square, and knight to d6 is no longer possible. Now, there is a computer line here that suggests bishop f4 renewing the threat on d6 and adding a threat to c7. However, after e5, bishop d2, d4, knight d5, bishop takes d2 check, queen recaptures bishop, queen takes queen check, king takes queen, and king f8, sidestepping the fork on c7. This is really unclear, kind of draws. These rooks are all kind of stopped behind pawns, no open lines. It's a position that wasn't played, but it's an interesting line, and Topalov did opt for something else. So after d5, instead Topalov played a brilliant a3. So what Topalov's doing here is he's saying either you're going to retreat your bishop and waste a tempi, at which point I'll play b4, and then you'll retreat your queen and waste another tempo, or you're going to take a knight. And I think Ivanchuk is actually forced to take the knight here, as he did in the game. And now in this position, we see that Topalov's going to have Siamese bishops in a wide open space to strafe the board and cause Ivanchuk no end of hassle. Probably Topalov considered this to be possibly better. And I can see where he would come up with that. It's a brilliant way to gain two bishops in a wide open space. So this position is very interesting. Of course, Topalov did take with the pawn, not with the knight, because if he did take with the knight, then follows d4, putting the knight to the king. But Veselin has an interesting intermezzo with b4 there. But then, of course, knight takes b4, a takes b4, and queen takes the rook with a significant material advantage. It's very much unclear because Ivanchuk does trade his development and initiative for a little bit of material. But then, of course, after knight b5, the king has to maybe move, to avoid the fork, and it's a monstrous position, and it looks like Topalov could come storming back, but that's not guaranteed. Maybe Ivanchuk could find a resourceful defense and make something occur. So this isn't what Topalov played after all. So b pawn takes the bishop, and then play continues. Knight f6, comes bishop g2, black castles, and queen to b3, protecting the pawn. D takes the c pawn, queen recaptures, and now begins Ivanchuk's attack. e5. e5 prepares bishop e6 with tempo on the queen, and white still has to get castled. Topalov investing still another move into this knight, presumably testing the light squared bishop. I mean, if he could get the brother bishop advantage, it probably would be game over for black. If black couldn't even contest the light squares, yeah, this is game over. This is too much to handle. And not only does knight d6 test the light square bishop, but it also tests the pawn on b7. This is a pawn that's basically overloaded and won't easily be defended. It can't push because then the knight is on pre. And not only is the knight on pre, but it's also pinned against the rook on a8. So this is the kind of thing that looks like it could be a decent attack. if there was time to pull it off, but the initiative just isn't there. Ivanchuk, bishop d6, chasing the queen back to the d3 square, and then the fatal shot, e4. e4 tests the queen. Computer says back to c2 is the correct square. Slightly worse is knight takes, which is what Topalov played. And then knight takes knight. We trade off bishop for knight. And now rook to the center. When we do a count on the development, we find black with now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pieces developed, soon to be 6 when the rook moves to the e file. White back to c2 with tempo, and then comes the fatal shot, knight d4. Knight d4 attacking the queen again, and simultaneously readying the coup de grace after knight to e2. Now, of course, queen can't take because then the pawn falls along with the game, so the king is obliged. After king e2, rook f8, just trusting the position, bringing the last piece into the attack, pointing it at the center, pointing it at the king. We've got ourselves 22 points worth of firepower bearing down on the king's position. If it's not from this angle, it's from this angle. If it's not straight up the front, we got the bishop with the discovery. I mean, it's just pretty much curtains. Wow, white enjoys some leisure time at home with 13 points on the back row that haven't involved themselves in the game yet. Queen b4, hoping to trade off. If Topalov could force the trade, this would be the win, but Ivanchuk's not obliged. Ivanchuk, queen h5, check. And of course, bishop f3 to chase the queen with tempo won't work because then bishop c4, checkmate. So the only viable defense here, f3. And after f3 came f5, testing the bishop again, opening up a discovery on the king, testing the bishop. Intermezzo g4, testing the queen, but then queen h3 with the calmness. G takes the f5 pawn. Bishop takes the f5 pawn. And then queen c4. After queen c4, king to the corner. And rook to e1, I guess hoping to mount some kind of defense, but it's just all for naught. After rook e4, Veselin Topalov resigns the position. Of course, if the queen takes, it's just over after the bishop takes back. And if the pawn takes, bishop g4 check, maybe king f2, queen h2 check, king f1, and then checkmate after bishop to h3. So as much as this is a clinic on development and turning it into a crushing initiative, it's also a little bit of a warning tale regarding wasting tempi in the game. When we look at how many moves were invested in this knight and in this queen, and moves that didn't force Ivanchuk's hand, moves that didn't take initiative. When we look at these rooks and this bishop representing 13 points that never ever got involved in the game, we can see, how the two are kind of tied hand in hand. It's a lot easier to get initiative on one's opponent when they're not making the best use of their tempi and playing efficiently. So get out there, put your pieces on the best squares, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.
Hey, check this video out to make sure that you get more important information to bring your chess to the next level.